Welcome to another edition of Facts Over Fear. My guest might look a little familiar because he was just here last week, but so much has happened just in the time you were here, Steve, that we've got to do like a whole recalibration. Okay, if you're just joining us, here's what I'm talking about, because Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania just came within weeks of losing its primary newspaper. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, a paper that's been around since 1786, was set to shut down entirely, laying off more than 170 workers after years of financial losses and a bitter labor dispute, according to WESA. Now, for a moment, it did look like Pittsburgh was about to become the largest U.S. city without a major daily newspaper, which was why Steve was here last week to talk about what was going to happen. But we're going to get to this here in just a minute, your thoughts on what happened. When the Block family, who has owned the paper for many years now, announced its sale of the Post-Gazette recently, it was actually to a nonprofit. The Venetoulis Institute for Local Journalism, which publishes the digital success story, the Baltimore Banner, bought the Post-Gazette, even though the Block said it was not the highest bidder. Now, many in Pittsburgh, feared it would be sold to a hedge fund notorious for stripping newspapers, according to resources, and we're glad to hear that that hasn't happened. The Institute's benefactor, hotel magnate Stuart Bainum Jr., has said that he plans to invest $30 million into the Banner and the Post-Gazette over the next 5 years. The Newspaper Guild of Pittsburgh, which is this local union, says it hopes to be part of the process of rebuilding. Now, whether the union will be invited is uncertain. We're going to talk about that today. On top of those developments, the other thing that Steve and I chatted about last week is that journalists, labor unions, and the community are also coming together with an effort called Paper. And this initiative was started assuming that the paper might be folding. So this paper, though, is short for the Pittsburgh Alliance for People Empowered Reporting, not just about saving jobs, but really about saving local democracy. Steve, I just ran through a whole bunch of updates, but how are you today?
I'm good. You know, it's a much different conversation now.
Yes.
So much has happened. You know, we had our first paper town hall, less than 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And it seems like forever. I mean, so much has happened since then. It just seems like that's in another universe.
Yeah.
You know, the big news seems to happen, happens unexpectedly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, it seems to happen when I'm on an assignment. You know, I learned about the PG closing, the announced closing, when I was on an assignment in the Mon Valley. And that was back in January. And I was on the North Shore last Tuesday. And, and all of a sudden my phone started buzzing and it was the announcement of the buyer. And, my first reaction was relief because I'd been hearing the same thing you and everybody else had, that it was going to be a hedge fund. And if you've been following the newspaper industry at all, I know you have, Natalie, but for the listeners, I mean, what the hedge funds do. They come in and, they strip it down and sell off the assets and, you're left with the shadow of a newspaper and it doesn't really help the community. It's predatory.
It is.
There's no other way to put it. It's predatory. And, the fact that it was the Venetoulis Institute, my first reaction was, hey, this is good news. I'm familiar with the Baltimore Banner. They do really good work at the Baltimore Banner. So, that was my initial reaction was a relief. I was actually in the North Shore shooting. I was outside. I was by that water feature down there, right next to the stadium, and so I sat down. I was going to process this and read through some of the emails, read through the announcement. I immediately had some questions too.
Yeah.
Okay, what does this mean? What's it mean for the staff? Which assets did they buy? What's that mean for us as a guild, as a union? I do have some news on that front for you because the folks at the Venetoulis Institute did reach out to the guild and said that they wanted to voluntarily recognize the guild as the bargaining agent for the workers.
Really?
Yeah. So that's.
That in and of itself is a really big deal. If you're just joining me, I'm Natalie Bensavanga. I didn't properly introduce Steve because we had done this last week under different circumstances, but he is a multimedia journalist, longtime multimedia veteran journalist at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, award-winning, amazing human being all the way around. And Steve, you've been in this game for so long, knowing that they are voluntarily recognizing the union. I mean, that's surprising to me in a really good way. I don't get surprised in a good way these days, it seems.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what that actually means?
Well, that's one of the questions we have. Like,
Yeah,
I hate to. We just have so many questions, and
of
every
course.
when a question is answered, like, okay, they're going to recognize the union. Then we're saying, okay, what's that relationship going to look like? Um, how's that going to work?
Mhm.
I think I'm just learning about this,
Sure.
Natalie, because everything is happening very quickly here. But they want to meet with the guild fairly soon, so
Mhm.
we will learn a little bit more at that point. But this time last week, after we had the announcement, we the the folks at the institute were a little unclear about the union, about what.
Sure.
And for folks who've been on strike for 3 years, 3+ years,
Yeah.
trying
Longest
to
labor
hold.
strike in the history of this country, I think, was
Well, it's
this. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, certainly the one that most recent I can remember. We did
Yeah.
some research to see if there was another. There's nothing even close in the
No.
city,
No.
which is a big labor city. I mean, there's a lot
Oh.
of labor history here. But the messaging last week was kind of unclear about whether they would
Mhm.
recognize the union. They were saying, yeah, if the workers want a union, it was just like it was good for them to say. It's good for them to reach out to us and
Yeah.
say, "We wanna recognize the guild as the bargaining agent." So that is a great first step. That's a great move.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you that it comes on the heels of, you mentioned the WESA article.
Mhm.
The WESA, Julie at WESA has been great at reporting on this, and she reported in depth about it over the weekend.
Mhm.
And so Uh, there was that. We also circulated a petition.
Mhm.
I think we have well over 1,000 signatures, and basically the
Wow.
petition is asking the institute to recognize
Mhm.
the union and to bargain
Mhm.
in good faith. It's like, but I don't know what influenced their decision, but
Right.
if I am in their shoes, I'm paying very close attention to what happens in the city right now and how people are
Yes.
reacting. And this was a direct result of the organizing that the guild did to get answers to these questions.
Right, and I think it's also, to your point, important that, like, if they did their homework at all, and I'm sure that they did, because I think if they hadn't, they wouldn't be reaching out right now. They would have seen that were the blocks about to shut down because of not wanting to just do what was right by the people that had been on strike, that took it all the way to the highest courts and were, sided with, even with those courts saying, hey, the bloc's got to take care of their employees. So to start off on the wrong foot, I think would send the wrong public message and just not look good for the
Mhm.
company. So I think it makes sense to at least say, hey, let's all just meet at the table and see what this means. Is it true? Because I had heard this, that everybody's going to have to reapply for their jobs. And what does that look like, actually?
Well, we heard that too,
Mhm.
and that process of interviewing started last week. So
Oh, wow.
people
Oh,
have,
they really started. Okay.
right. Well, they don't have a whole lot of time. I mean, this time in 2 weeks, they're gonna be running a daily newspaper. So, they've gotta move very quickly. That process started last week. Those interviews are very short.
Hmm.
Um, they're about 20 minutes long.
Hmm.
Uh, they were in person on Friday. I was unable to make that, so I've not interviewed there yet. I think they're gonna have some more online this week.
Hmm.
I'm unclear about that. They've not gotten confirmation about that, but they are moving. They have to move quickly. It's kind of like speed dating, I guess.
Yeah.
You come in and you do a quick set of interviews. I have no idea how that process is going to work. So,
Hmm.
we'll see. A big question that we have, um, and this directly relates to the readers, is how many people are they've signaled they're going to do steep staff cuts.
Wow.
We don't know what that means. How many people are going to be? How many journalists are they going to have at the PG?
Yeah.
You know, that's a big question. I have concerns about that for a couple different reasons. One is I was on strike for people, but my colleagues for
I
three
know.
plus years, and I feel closely. I want them to have jobs and be able to pay their bills, support their families, and contribute to the best journalism possible in
Hmm.
this city. Also, from a reader standpoint, if the Post Gazette, I remember when the Post Gazette had a staff of what, 280 people,
Yeah.
and we did a pretty good job of covering, the region, but even then it was a struggle. With the
Mhm.
staff they have now, 100, they're not covered. There are a lot of things that are not being covered. You cut that further, you have to think, okay, what coverage is gonna be cut?
Mhm.
So, this city deserves and needs the best, most robust journalism possible, and
Yeah.
so that's the question I have is how many people are they gonna keep?
Yeah, and I think that's a completely fair question. We had a lot of people join us. I think this topic is of definite interest. So if you're just joining us, hey, I'm Natalie Bencivenga. I'm here with Steve Mellon. He is a Pittsburgh Post-Gazette multimedia journalist who has been at the PG for many years. Full transparency, I worked there myself for 6 years, and Steve and I got to work together on a few things, which was really cool. Um, and I harken back to those times, Steve, because I remember my very first day in 2014, walking into that old newsroom when it was still downtown, and it felt like a dream. Like, it felt like this is a real newsroom. There was, like, laughing and yelling and just, noise, typing, talking on the phone, slamming phones down. Like, it was just it was the kind of thing you dream about as a young journalist. You're like, "I'm in a newsroom. Like, this is crazy." And, as the years went on, obviously, things began to change. We saw a lot of our colleagues leave. I left under duress. There were so many things that happened. And so I can only imagine you being the person that you are and caring so much about what happens to the people at the Post Gazette. This must be challenging, but also knowing you're not being passive about this process. You're actually also working on something called paper. And so for people that may not know what that is, can you share a little bit about that? And now that we know that the PG is still going to be in some form of existence, does that change the direction of where paper may go?
Yeah, we learned, a long time ago, and I'm talking about members of the Newspaper Guild of Pittsburgh. We learned a long
Mhm.
time ago that, like, when something happens, some uncertainty or something bad happens, is that you have to act on it. You can't just sit
Yep.
around and wait for something, hope that something good is gonna happen. So, within a couple of days of the PG announcing that it was going to close, we got together with, we had a meeting of the members in good standing, those of us who'd been on strike, and we came up with a couple different plans. One was to ask it was to appeal to the PG to keep the paper open and try to come up with a plan for that. We had basically 2 different, plans of action. We had
Mhm.
that one, and then the other we split up, and the other group was going to try to find an alternative. Like, if the Post, because that's not gonna be around, what can we do as journalists, as union journalists who know how to organize, know how to bring people together? What can we do to continue the type of journalism that we'd like to see that was reflected in many ways in the strike paper that we published, the Pittsburgh
Yeah.
Union Progress? How can we keep that journalism going in this city? And that's like we wanted to continue to serve the public, and we also wanted to save our jobs. So we met within a week or so. We met with this is like the second week of May, or I'm sorry,
Mhm.
second week of January. We met with
Mhm.
several community stakeholders. We had two big meetings. I think one we had about 150 people show up from the
Yeah.
community. So it told us that there was a lot of interest in this, and we quickly came up with a uh, with a mission statement, which is like to find an alternative to the block owned Post Gazette,
Yeah.
an alternative news site. That was our goal, and we came up with the name paper, Pittsburgh Alliance for People Empowered Reporting, which kind of summarizes what we're all about. And so we've been exploring ever since then. We've been meeting with the community members, sometimes a couple times a week,
Mhm.
and trying to come up with an alternative. What would that look like if we were going to put together like an ideal news
Mhm.
organization? What would that look like? And we've been pressing on with that, pressing on, pressing on. To that end, we after looking at all the alternatives, we decided on a multi-stakeholder co-op,
Mm.
which means a cooperative venture, a cooperative news organization that is owned by both the workers and the community. And we did that for a couple of reasons because we learned just from talking to people and in our town hall meeting a couple of weeks ago, we
Mhm.
learned that people they don't just want to be engaged in news gathering process, they want to be stakeholders in this.
Yeah.
It's a great way to spread the accountability. When the blocks made a unilateral decision And, they did this when they fired Rob Rogers. They did this when, they published that racist editorial, back in, I think, 2017, 2016,
Mhm.
2017. They kicked, the 2 young African American reporters, Alexis Johnson and Michael Santiago, off the George
Yep.
Floyd coverage. They made those unilateral decisions, and
Mhm.
there was community outcry. We had walkouts in the newsroom over this. You remember this stuff, and
Oh, yeah.
but the blocks did like we had no power to change those actions.
Yeah.
Now, if it's community owned, worker owned, there is accountability built into the model right
That's
there.
right.
So that's the model we've been pursuing. Uh, we had our first town hall. I didn't know what to expect in our first town hall. We had it out in Oakland at the Black Box Theater. I didn't know what to expect. I thought maybe 30 or 40 people showed up, or would show up. We had about 100 people. It was hard to count because people were kind of coming in and out. We
Yeah.
we were beyond capacity, and there were people standing in the back. We broke into small groups because we didn't want to have we didn't want to talk to people. We wanted to listen to people. So we broke up into about
Right.
7 or 8 small groups. I was one of the facilitators, and we had a great discussion. We
Mm.
we took down a ton of notes. So what we're trying to build is we want to know what readers would like to see in a news organization, starting from scratch. What beats would you like to see covered? How would you like those to be reimagined? How would you like to meet on? Would you like to meet on a regular basis with the staff? All these things. Just break it down. So we gathered that data, and then a
What
week
was
later,
surprising for you when you gathered that data? What was like, "Oh, wow, I wasn't expecting this as a thread through it."
well, one of the things that we really learned is that in my group, in my small group, I had about I
Mhm.
don't know 8 or 10 people in my small group, and people really want. But there's a lot of institutional coverage. When a big development happens, reporters all call Walnut Capital,
Right.
whoever's financing, what they want is what people told me they want is they want like it's affecting Walnut Capital because they're investing money in it, but there are going
Right.
to be people in the neighborhood that are going to be affected by this gigantic sky rise that's plopped right down in the middle of the neighborhood.
Yeah.
So one guy looked at me and said, "Why? I would want somebody to go walk up down the street and knock on doors and find out what the community thinks about it."
Yeah.
That's the kind
Mm.
of thing that we were hearing is that people want to be they want to recognize themselves in whatever publication they're seeing.
Mhm.
That's not happening. On stories that deeply affect their communities, they read that story and they don't recognize themselves or their voices in that.
And I will say this too, and not to critique the coverage of the PG closing, but there was a little bit of that from the reporting side in general. Um, I didn't hear a lot of community voices in those articles about why this is going to be a problem. I heard a lot of community leaders. I heard a lot of corporate leaders, philanthropic leaders quoted, but not like a lot of average folks. And I think
Mhm.
that's something that has continually been a blind spot in newsrooms everywhere. And that's why so many more people, I think, are turning to independent and alternative media sources because of that exact thing. They're not being called into the conversation, they're still being talked at. And I think
Yeah.
that's really important that paper, in whatever form it takes, is acknowledging that discrepancy and is at least listening to it because that's what I hear in a lot of the work that I do on my own.
Yeah. Oh, and your show is a perfect example of that.
Mm.
I think the people stop reading newspapers for a reason.
Yeah.
And for many reasons. But
Mhm.
one of the reasons is that people didn't recognize themselves with their communities anymore. There was a
Right.
time when we did that. Like, if there was something big
Yes.
happening, I would be sent out, like, I'm talking about, like, 30 years ago. I'd be
Sure.
sent out into the community to do that, to go knock on doors. But as
Mhm.
staff shrunk, that Natalie, that's hard work,
Oh,
because
yeah.
you get rejection a lot of times,
Yes.
it's really easy to pick up the phone, call somebody that you know is gonna pick up the phone. They've got a PR agent that's gonna put you in touch with them. They have a
Exactly.
vested interest in being in their voice and their narrative being
Mhm.
put out in the news.
Mhm.
Most of us don't have that. We don't have a
No.
PR agent, and, the reporters don't have our phone numbers. The
Right.
reporters have to go to them, and that means you gotta get off your ass, get in your car, drive
Yeah.
to that neighborhood, and knock on doors and have people talk to you. It's a process. It's hard work, and it absolutely has to be done.
And it takes trust building. And I think that's another thing that we've seen erode over time. And that's why I'm so thrilled that paper is working towards trying to rebuild those community bridges because it is so necessary. When we zoom out, Steve, let's talk as we wrap this up a little bit about the impact that an organization like paper can have on our local democracy, because we're alluding to it, but can you really walk us through that?
Yeah, one of the issues that we've had recently, and you see this in the Washington Post and so many other newspapers, CBS News purchased,
Mhm.
now it's in control of the Ellison family. We have way too many forms of media in this country, Sinclair Broadcasting Group, that are owned by wealthy individuals, extremely wealthy institutions, and it just really locks us out. And they are not publishing newspapers for the good of the community.
That's
They
right.
have, they have. I don't. It's an agenda is kind of a broad term, but their end goal is to make money. Uh, and a lot of times that means aligning yourself with whoever's in power at the moment, and that's not healthy for communities. So I think
Yeah.
having I would there are already a number of we're not doing anything new here in Pittsburgh. This is a proven model. These co-ops exist in other places, many other places. Madison, Wisconsin, Memphis, Tennessee. There are a number of these things. And this kind of insulates us from just hearing the voices of the wealthy and the powerful.
Mhm.
That ability to shape narratives, that's a big thing, especially now
Yeah.
that and if there is not a trustworthy, accountable news organization in a community, then like who do you go to? You go to Facebook to find
Right.
out what's going on. You go to Nextdoor to find out what's going on. You talk to your neighbor.
Mhm.
How effective is that? Especially when you're up against a powerful behemoth that can publish. They can get their message out on a number of different. So they have a ton of followers on social media.
Yes.
That narrative is picked up by other news organizations. You know how the news business works, Natalie.
Oh, yeah.
Especially on that level.
Oh,
So,
yeah. And I think it's more important than ever that, we, the people, are putting our voices out there in a collective way. I mean, I just saw that article
mm,
in the New York Times where there were all those MAGA accounts that were acting as influencers and as independent journalists, and they were all completely fabricated, AI made. They look like you and I, but they don't have any label that explains that
mm,
they're fake. And so, once again, I think this mistrust at this sort of national level is not going anywhere, which is why it's more important than ever that we build up trust in our local communities with our local newspapers, journalists, digital content providers, et cetera, because there's something to be said about the fact that you guys held an event and maybe people who weren't as informed or understand how the news works is like, oh, now I know a reporter. Like they're not this thing, this entity. It's Steve. It's my neighbor Steve. And I can
mm.
I can reach out to Steve. Like I know how to get a hold of Steve now. So I do think that's how we're going to rebuild the news industry. It's not going to be at the CBS, ABC level. It's going to be
Right.
at the local level. So if people want to learn about paper or perhaps visit and get involved with the next town hall or the next event that you're going to do, where can they go?
Well, they can go to ourpapernow.org. Um, we do have, and we were finalizing the venue today. We have another town hall
Oh,
um, May 13th on a Wednesday. It's
okay.
at the Homestead United Presbyterian Church. I think it's on Ann Street in Homestead.
Nice.
So be looking out for that. It's ourpapernow.org. I tell you what, Natalie, I can't do anything about CBS News. Can't do anything about
Right.
the Washington Post. It's like that's not my thing. But we can do something in our community.
That's right.
So I don't care. I hope the best, and I'm optimistic about the Venetoulis Institute and the
Sure.
Post-Gazette. We're going to, but no matter what happens there,
Yeah.
Natalie, there is a need for paper. There is a
Amen.
need for another news. Look, if they're cutting the staff, they're not going to be able to cover even what the Post-Gazette's covering now. So
No.
there are going to be communities that don't have coverage, that can't that are not going to be able to have their stories told. They're still going to be unheard, and paper can play a role in that and should play a role in that. I'm going full speed ahead on this, because I think it's necessary, not just for journalism, is for our democracy, for local accountability, to make our one of the things I always appreciated about newspapers is that, in addition to providing news, they were kind of the glue that held the connective tissue that bound these communities together, and, that paper can play a role in that.
Amen to that. Thank you so much, Steve, for joining me for Facts Over Fear. Obviously, we're going to stay in touch because there will continue to be developments as this process moves along. I'll definitely try to come to the next, town hall on May 13th, and I'll share with my audience what I'm learning from all of you during that wonderful event. So thank you for that. And as always, everyone, I appreciate you and your thoughts and your comments. And until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Bye, everybody.
Bye bye now.